previous lesson, we talked a little bit about social choice mechanisms, right? The idea that what's going to guide society from moving from one state of the world to another, or from status quo to something else. And for the most part, given that certain conditions hold, and we'll talk about those conditions, most economists agree that we should rely on competitive markets, right? This kind of decentralized idea of buyers and sellers doing what they want to do. You're trying to make money as sellers of goods and services, and buyers trying to kind of maximize their well-being. That decentralized market activity should be how we allocate scarce resources. When we're talking about competitive markets, as economists, we're envisioning markets with certain characteristics, and those characteristics are the following. First, we have a market with many or multiple buyers and sellers, that the market is not too thin. We're not going to put a numeric value on this. We're talking more than a handful of buyers and sellers. Second, the goods and or services that are bought and sold are largely homogeneous, or largely the same, right? Agricultural products are good ones to think about corn or wheat or milk, so on. Third, that there's little friction for either firms on the production side, or buyers or consumers on the buyer side. There's little friction to enter and or exit this market. So there aren't huge or expensive barriers to entry and or exit. Fourth,
that competitive markets require that no externalities exist is very important. In fact, this class is focused on situations in which there are externalities present, and therefore we can't rely on free markets to lead to efficient outcomes in the allocation of scarce resources. Here we have a definition of externality. It exists when the consumption or production choices of one person or firm enters the utility or production function of another entity without that entity's permission or compensation. So a classic example is pollution. In our everyday lives, all of us generate some level of pollution, right? Whether we're driving a car or flying in an airplane. In those cases, we're contributing to greenhouse gases, which can contribute to climate change and global warming. But it's not that external cost that we're imposing on society from those activities is part of our accounting, part of our maximization. It's external to that, right? So you can think of consumers maximizing utility by making their decisions. Just likewise, firms are maximizing their profits, and maybe they're producing, goods like cement, or maybe they're generating electricity. It's not that they're intending, right, to impose costs in terms of pollution or external costs. It's just that but the fact is that they are. And there are plenty of examples of externalities that we observe in our everyday lives. Somebody may take good care of their home and property, and there's an external benefit to that maybe the value of their neighbors' homes or other homes on their street increases because of that care. Think of a pretty trivial example. Someone comes into a lunch, a cafeteria, shared space, and they break out a tuna fish sandwich. Not everyone likes the smell of tuna fish, and we've got a negative externality. Another kind of famous one is beekeeping, which may bring private benefits to the beekeeper, but also external benefits to the public, right? Bees help pollinate, you could say, nearby orchards and agricultural lands, and so you have an example of a positive externality. So externality can be either positive or negative, and this course in particular is going to be focused on problems of pollution, problems of resource degradation, problems of biodiversity loss, and those are all negative externalities.
Now that we've defined competitive markets, the next question is why? Why do economists want to rely or agree that we should rely on competitive markets to allocate scarce resources? What are the advantages as a social level for society to do so? And those ideas actually go back to Adam Smith. Adam Smith, in his famous book, An Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations in 1776, what we typically referred to as the wealth of nations. First, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect their dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. And what Smith is saying here is it's self-interest by these shopkeepers that they're producing goods and services that people want, right? There needs to be a demand for them, but it's the profit motive that's encouraging the butcher, the brewer, and the baker in this example. Every individual neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he is promoting. He intends only in his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. Nor is it always the worse for society that it was no part of it. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of society more effectually, this is key, more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. So what Smith is saying is kind of through this invisible hand, these market forces, right? No one's telling buyers what to buy or sellers what to produce, but through their own kind of self-interested motives, we get to a point in society that is actually better than if buyers and or sellers, agents in the market, were trying to promote the interests of society. Right? And this is a powerful thought that self-interest can lead to a better outcome than if buyers and or sellers had or tried to have society's best interest in mind. Let's talk a little bit about competitive market equilibrium, this kind of state of rest. And to do so, we're going to be introducing the familiar supply and demand. We'll start with demand. We'll say that quantity demanded, this is going to be a function. We're going to choose some numeric value so we can solve for this. But demand is always going to be some sort of downward sloping function. In this case, it's very simple linear function to work, so it's easy to work with. You could think of this as, a market for generic cola or something, or generic sandwiches or hot dogs. We don't have to be specific. But again, something that's many buyers and sellers and largely homogeneous. Let's think a little bit about this demand curve. What is it? Well, it's really just a collection of every potential buyer in a market for whatever good, their willingness to pay, the maximum they'd be willing to pay for a certain unit of a good. Now let's consider supply. So note the supply curve is going up. That's showing that kind of increasing marginal cost of production for firms. And suppose we have a price of 6, again an arbitrary price, our quantity supplied of 4. It's the area under the price and above the supply curve, because the way to think about this is it's also the marginal cost curve. At the lowest price at which companies will be willing to produce and supply units of the good is that's what generates a supply curve. And so if they sell for more than that, then, well, we can't call it profit exactly because profit includes fixed costs. Maybe they're paying for rent or building or something like that. But this is like their idea of marginal profit. They're getting 6 in return and it's costing them something less. Let's put supply and demand together and solve for the market equilibrium. All right, the equilibrium condition is where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, or supply equals demand. Many of us remember this from previous classes in microeconomics or in high school or wherever. And if you set quantity demanded equal to quantity supplied in our model, you're going to get a price that's equal to 6 and a quantity that's equal to 4. 6, 4. We have producer surplus that we can and consumer surplus. With linear supply and demand functions, these are pretty easy areas to calculate. It's 1/2 the base times the height. Consumer surplus, right, we have the base of 4, height of 4. So 1/2 of 16 is 8. That's what our consumer surplus. Producer surplus is a height of 6. Again, a base of 4. So it's 24. Half of that is 12. And so total surplus, we're going to pop that up here, TS, total surplus, which equals consumer surplus plus producer surplus, is equal to 20. Point is that the collection of these two surplus values is the well-being, or a measure of economic well-being of both segments of our market and society.